I'm going to be giving somewhat of a special talk today. It's going to be on how to protect ourselves from basically dark, demonic, evil entities, forces that are there in the universe. It's very interesting that when we announced this, actually, we got a lot of extremely positive feedback from people. For some reason, it seems that this was a very popular topic. On Facebook especially, when we first announced this, we kept getting comment after comment. Oh, I hope you're going to film this. When is it going to be available? Oh, I wish I could be there, but I'm in California. Just all sorts of interesting comments like that. And it's rare that we get so many comments like that about a talk that I'm going to give. And I think very specifically the reason why this topic is in fact so popular is because in this age of the Kali Yuga, this age that we're living in, and very specifically the last several decades, what we've seen is that indeed there seems to be more and more individuals who are harassed by various dark entities. Whether it's ghosts, whether it's spirits, whether it's just voices in their head, which of course if they go to a psychiatrist they'll be told that they have schizophrenia. Oh, that's one thing you could call it. But the truth of the matter is, there are indeed very real beings who inhabit our universe, who have the ability to be in certain places or to attach themselves to certain individuals in such a way that they make the life of that individual a hell. In some cases, they will do this to an individual without their permission. In some cases, some individuals will make the mistake of very consciously summoning such beings to them and then regretting that they ever did. Which in 41 years that I've been on the spiritual path, I've known hundreds of such individuals who purposefully called such beings to them, and I've never known one who didn't regret it eventually, in one way or another. But before we go deeper into this, I want to talk just a little bit about the nature of these beings first. First, I want to give everyone a scenario here. And you find this a little bit less here in Omaha than you do in larger cities, like especially Chicago or New York, where I've lived in both places. I'm from New York, where you have dark alleys. You know, the proverbial dark alley. Well, envision this, that it's one night and it's very late at night, very dark. There aren't many people on the streets. You decide to take a shortcut as you're trying to make your way home, and you go, of course, through the proverbial dark alley. As you're walking through the dark alley, you get halfway through this alley. Again, to your knowledge, there are no other humans there, but then suddenly in the darkness you hear something. You turn around and you realize there's a person there in the darkness. You can't really see who they are, but you can see it's someone big. And they're being very quiet, and you know they're watching you. At this point, of course, you don't know what sort of human you're encountering. You see, this could be a cop. This could be a cop who, you know, he's just there because he's investigating something. It could be just some homeless person who really doesn't mean any harm. Or it could be that you're about to die because it's someone who is going to kill you for one reason or another, to take something from you, to just kill you for fun, etc. We know this is the case, correct? If we were to find ourselves in such a situation in a dark alley, suddenly there's a person there. We know it could be anything. From someone who, what to speak of harming us, they would try to help us if they could, to someone who would want to harm us, to anything in between. We know that this is the case for humans, correct? That all humans are not the same. Now, interestingly, what we sometimes forget is the fact that when dealing with living beings who, there's only one difference, really, one significant difference between these beings and human beings, and that is very simply that they do not have a corporeal body. When we encounter such beings, is it not the case that we also don't know what sort of being we are encountering? It is so interesting how, especially, unfortunately, sadly, in New Age circles, people seem to have this idea that, oh, because you are encountering a being that doesn't have a body, it's necessarily good. Really? Well, we know that's not true for human beings. We know that's not true for animals. You encounter an animal, it could be a little kitten that you can just pet, or, you know, if you're in the wrong place, it could be a bobcat who wants to kill you. Again, humans, animals, we know that it is the case that with any beings we encounter, they could be good, they could be bad, they could be in between. Well, just because they don't have a body, this doesn't make that any different. When we are dealing with the non-corporeal, what sometimes people would call the metaphysical realm, the realm in which we have a myriad of beings, a vast myriad, a vast diversity, a vast hierarchy of beings of every description imaginable, what we will see is that indeed some of them will be beings of light and goodness, truly, what in Sanskrit is called devas, or the gods, beings who are responsible for all of the good in this universe, beings who are responsible for the rain and the sun and for nature growing, etc., beings who are beneficent and who mean us nothing but good and who we can use as assistants. In the West, we sometimes call them angels. Doesn't matter what we call them. We know that there are good beings out there. Also, there are neutral beings. There are beings who, they just happen to not have a body. Truthfully, there are more beings without body than with. Statistically speaking, number-wise, population-wise. You won't find this number on Wikipedia. But spiritual individuals know there are more beings non-corporeal than corporeal. And then now continuing down the spectrum, there are beings who make the greatest serial killers and psychopaths that we've ever read about look like nothing in comparison. Why? Because in addition to being evil, in addition to being psychopathic in nature, that is, their chitta, their mind substance, lacks empathy and, on the contrary, wishes to harm, in addition to that, they also have power to them as well. That corporeal beings won't. They have abilities that corporeal beings won't. So, what is the point? The point is, when dealing with non-corporeal beings, beings without bodies, we want to be very careful who we're dealing with. You know, we are meant to work with positive beings. Again, the gods, angels, whatever we wish to call them. In modern times, we'll call them angels. Really, they are gods. They are devas, demigods. They're not God. They're assistants of the Supreme Being. These are beings who we want to work with. And this is one of the richnesses. People have heard me maybe talk about this. This is one of the richnesses of Vedic spirituality, of this Vedic tradition, is that we know that the cosmos is alive with personality, with persons. And such diversity that it is amazing. There are beings who live for 100,000 years. There are beings who live for 1,000,000 years. There are beings who are so powerful they can create a planet if they so choose. And none of these beings are God. They're just like us. They're just Atman. They're little sparks of consciousness who, due to reincarnation, due to their own karma, due to their own will and their choice to create themselves as they are, they will find themselves anywhere within this vast spectrum of being. Some as humans, some as lesser than humans, some as animals, some as, again, non-corporeal beings, some as gods, some as asuras, the opposite of gods, demonic beings. More, there is no spiritual culture upon the earth, ancient or modern, barring modern commercialist New Age speculation, barring that nonsense. There is no spiritual tradition on earth that does not accept what I just told you, the existence of all these beings. This is not just a Christian thing, you know, the idea that you have angels and devils. No. Buddhism accepts this very much so. Is this not the case? Buddhism accepts this. Jainism accepts this. What we call Hinduism, what we practice, Vedic spirituality, accepts this. All pre-Christian European culture accepts this. Indeed, Christianity, Judaism, Islam accept this, and on and on and on. So this is not speculation. This is not controversial. What I just explained previously about the existence of these myriad beings, every ancient culture accepts. Now, having said all this, I want to talk a little bit about what is the nature of these beings first, before we talk about how to protect ourselves very specifically from these beings. First of all, in order to understand what is the nature of these beings, we need to understand the three levels of body, the three levels of what is called rupam, or form. And again, this is especially very well enunciated in Vedic spirituality, but many, many ancient cultures accept what I'm about to tell you. And that is namely that when we look at especially the human person, we'll just focus on the human person because it makes it very easy. If you look at any individual who's here, what do you see? Well, you see a physical body, correct? Well, the truth of the matter is that there are three primary bodies. There's a little bit more than that, but three of great importance. There is what's called stula sharira, that is the actual physical gross body. And that's self-explanatory. We know what our body is, what it's capable of, etc., what its nature is. Then there is sushma sharira. Now, this second body is especially interesting and of importance. This sushma sharira means body. This second body is comprised of the subtle body that is there that you cannot see, but it's not pure consciousness. It's not actual spirit. It's not eternal. It too, like the physical body, is temporary, but it is comprised of a deeper and higher substance. It's comprised of mind, it's comprised of memory, it's comprised of what are called sanskaras, or previous psychological and perceptual impressions that we've had from the past, etc. It's what sometimes is called the astral body, the psychic body, the subtle body, the causal body. There are many different words for this depending on what metaphysical or occult tradition in the West that you read about. But again, using other terminology from Sanskrit, etc., it's known by many different names, but it's the exact same concept. This is the subtle body. For anyone who's done astral travel, for example, or who has at least read about astral travel, it is that sushma sharira, that psychic body, that is doing the astral traveling. Consciousness is there too, but to reach the level of consciousness, that's very, very difficult. I'm going to come back to this in a second because I want to mention the third body. Atma Swarupa. Atma Swarupa is the third body, that is consciousness itself. And we're using the word body in a very loose manner. We're using it in the sense of Dharmakaya in Buddhism, of the Kayas. Body meaning informed substance that is the central locus of a thing. All right? That's what we mean by body. We don't mean literally just a physical body. Thus, when I say the body of consciousness, I don't mean that consciousness has a physical body. I think we all get this, correct? All right. Those are the three quote-unquote bodies. Now, coming back to the second one, this sushma sharira, this is the one that we want to focus on very specifically for this talk. Again, this is the realm of dream. This is the realm of psychic abilities. This is the realm of kundalini, of chakras, of the 72,000 nadis, or currents of subtle energy that are there within this, again, subtle body. Everyone who is here has these three bodies. Ultimately, of course, we are consciousness. We are Atman. Atma Svarupa. Svarupa means true form or self-form of consciousness, Atma. That is the true us, ultimately. That is the part of us that is eternal, what properly is called soul or spirit, that Atman, that consciousness. But then, that consciousness, in its present form, is temporarily covered due to our illusion, due to our ego, by various strata of coverings. That is especially this, again, second thing, sushma sharira. This sushma sharira incorporates many things, of which I mentioned a few. It includes a sense of false identity, ahankara, ego. It includes, interestingly, lower intellect. That is, intellect as intellect is used in a factual, quantitative manner. It includes mind and more mind substance, chitta in Sanskrit. That means everything that includes the mind. So, for example, when we are in dream state, which is a recognized mode of consciousness in yoga, when we are in dream state, we are existing in the mode of chitta, of mind substance. It's a non-corporeal state. It's a state in which a lot of memory takes part, because much of our dreams involve memory, because memory itself is a part of this mind substance, chitta. Am I going too deep too fast? Or are people getting this? Very good. Wonderful. That's something that I love, is the fact that we have such intelligent audiences. Absolutely wonderful. Very good. Now, all that being said, we get this now, that when we are dealing with such beings, these beings are beings who their form is on that level of sushma sharira. what is sometimes again called the psychic, causal, astral, dream level, etc. They do not have a physical body, but they have everything else. If you were to close your eyes, be in a room of complete silence, be floating so you felt no tactile sensation, etc. In other words, if none of your senses were engaged, but still, of course, you have everything else. That is what they are. That is what they have. No physical body, but everything else. Memory, mind, etc., etc. So these are the beings that we're talking about. This being the case, the fact that they do not have physicality to them. Still, of course, they have the ability, we know, otherwise we wouldn't be interested in this topic, they have the ability to affect this physical realm. Now, not all of them do. The ones who are more neutral and thus simply lack physicality really can't do much at all. But then there are those beings who very consciously lack physicality because they want to hone those psychic skills to the point where they can indeed become powerful beings, if evil, if dark beings, powerful beings nonetheless, and thus affect those around them, including in physicality. This is why there are now what we're talking about, these specifically dark entities who, even though they don't have a physical body, they can affect us nonetheless, just as real as an actual person standing next to us. But of course, how do they affect us? Not physically. They communicate with us on the same level that they're on. What does that mean? They are psychic beings, they affect us psychically. They are beings who, because they're non-corporeal, they have the ability to live in a dreamscape, they have the ability to do things to us in our quote-unquote dreams, etc., etc. This is why people will experience such phenomena as sleep paralysis. Who here has not experienced this, that you're sleeping and then finally you wake up, oh, and you know you're awake and you can't move. It's horrible. And you try to move and you can't move, and now you jolt even more awake. So you know you're awake. You know it's not a dream. And you try to move, and this might go on for minutes and minutes and minutes. Or you have such experiences as you begin first, again, with a dream state where you're having a dream, but then suddenly you're aware of the dream, and suddenly you're aware that there is a being there, and now you are awake but still entrapped within the dream and encountering this evil being. And on and on. So many scenarios like this that people have experienced just in the dream state alone, but then also in the awake and conscious state also. We will sometimes encounter these beings. Sometimes we will quote-unquote see these beings as shadow beings. We're not actually seeing them with the physical eye. It's actually the psychic eye. It's actually the Agya Chakra that's seeing them, where we're in our home and suddenly we'll see dark shadows in quote-unquote the corner of our eyes. And as soon as we look, there's nothing there, but we know we saw them. I had this phenomenon years ago, like 20 years ago, when I was in an apartment in Chicago, and there were cat-like beings who were there. They seemed like cats, but they would just kind of be in the corner of the room. Anyone who came to my apartment would see them. They all experienced the same thing. And then finally I got rid of them, but for a little while they were there. And again, these are very real phenomena that people experience, either in dream state, in the waking state, etc. All right, let's go on a little bit deeper. Let's talk a little bit about, actually, I'm going to talk about different classes of these dark entities, dark beings. But before I do that, I also want to talk about a little deeper what is their nature. And what I'm going to talk about very briefly is what is called guna theory, G-U-N-A, guna theory. If you understand this, then you will understand much of how our world operates, much of behavior, etc., etc. And I'll try to state this as briefly as I can. Anything that is material, and what do we mean by material? Do we mean only what we can detect with the senses? No, mind is material. It's very subtle material. Again, remember I talked about that sushma sharira, that psychic body. That's material. By definition, what is meant by material is that which is temporal. The mind eventually disappears too. False identity, all these subtle things eventually disappear too. Thus, they are material, but just in a subtle way. So now understanding this, when I say material, I mean all material, not just the gross physicality, but even mind substance. Now, anything that is material has the ability to be in one of three modes of, let's say, vibrational energy. So there are three modes in which any material thing can be. It is either in sattva, which means purity, light, goodness, etc. The second one is rajas, which means passion, motion, activity. The third one is tamas, Tamas. Tamas means that which is dark, that which is ignorant, ignorant meaning the opposite of knowledge, that is enervating, that which falls apart, that which grounds us, has very dense gravity, etc. First, these three modes, anything that we can point to, including ourselves meaning what? Physical body and, again, psychic aspect, is influenced by one or another of these three things. Thus, you will find some people, again, keeping it on the human level to make it easy, you will find some people who are very sattvic, it's just their nature. They're very light and good and spiritual, and they seek health in everything that they do. They seek goodness in all things, etc., etc. Then you'll find some people who are very rajas, very passionate, very active all the time. It's like they can't sit still for a second. Very passionate people. And then you will find individuals who are tamas, who, this is the sports bar crowd. There you go, that was a joke. These are the people who literally cannot think beyond NASCAR. These are the people who have no intellectual interest, no spiritual interest, who basically happiness for such individuals consists of being drunk as often as possible and not thinking. These are tamasic people. We have all known such people. All of us. All of us. Now, understanding this, what these dark, evil beings are beings who are hyper-tamasic. That is, it's not simply that they are dark in this physical sense, but worse, psychically. But more, this coupled with what in modern psychology we would call being psychopathic in nature. That is, lacking all empathy. But more than this, not just lacking empathy, that's simply the negation of being a normative person. More than this, they derive pleasure in giving pain. They derive pleasure in torturing others. They derive pleasure in harming others. What's that book that was put out by some Harvard psychiatrist? I forget. Oh, the Psychopath Next Door. Have you heard of this book? Yeah. I think that this person said that 4% of the human population are psychopaths. That's amazing. 4% of the human population are individuals who, when you meet them, you may not necessarily know by simply encountering them, but in their mind, if they could get away with it legally, they would love to torture you to death just for their own pleasure. It's amazing. It's amazing. 4% of the human population is this. Now, when you are encountering a very specifically negative and dark and evil psychic entity, spirit, whatever you want to call it, ghost, etc., this is what you're encountering. Except they don't physically have the ability to harm you. They will try to harm you in what is in actuality a worse way, and that is in here. Now, all this being said, let's go a little bit deeper now, and I want to talk about just a few categories of such beings. We're not going to exhaust this, trust me, there are many, but I just want to talk about a few of these. Starting with this, very generally speaking, we have what is called the asura. This is the most generic term for this sort of being. An asura, interestingly, can even be a physical being, but very often they are non-physical beings. These are the true psychopaths of the metaphysical realm. And that's pretty much all I want to say about that. That is the broadest category that you hear all the time. In the Bhagavad Gita, this is spoken of, the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. It goes very deeply into the nature of what's called the Daivika, the divine person, but then the Asurika, the demonic person. So if you're especially interested in reading what their qualities are like, read the Bhagavad Gita, because it goes very deep into that. And in fact, interestingly, I've said this before, people ask me all the time that when Krishna is speaking about the divine and demonic natures, he talks a lot more about the demonic nature. And people will ask me all the time, well, why does Krishna spend so much time talking about the demonic nature? And I'll explain that, well, the divine nature, you can see that in examples all throughout the Vedic scriptures. But we also need to know intimately what is the nature of evil so that we can avoid it. That's why he goes so deeply into this. Let's go a little bit deeper. Now, these are several other classes. There are Rakshasas. Rakshasas are twilight beings. Sandhya Bhutas, they're called. These are twilight beings who they are not quite physical, but they have a strong ability to affect people on the physical plane. More, they're also cannibalistic. They eat humans. Ravana was one of these beings, the person I was talking about before, this demon who was defeated by Rama, etc. A subclass of these beings are called Brahma Rakshasas. These are especially devious because A, they usually enter your domain through your dreams, but the reason why they are called Brahma Rakshasas is because at first they will present themselves as nice beings. They will present themselves as almost spiritual beings. They will present themselves almost as beings of light in order to catch you off guard. Then, at least in theory, then they eat you. Those are the Brahma Rakshasas. Let's go a little bit deeper. Bhutas. Bhutas, this is another general term, but really the way it's used now especially, and correctly, it means ghosts. Ghosts. Let's talk a little bit about ghosts and the nature of so-called ghosts. Yes, ghosts are real. Number one, trust me, ghosts are real. There is zero doubt about this. If you don't believe ghosts are real, there's only one reason you do not believe they're real, because you haven't encountered one. But I have encountered hundreds, and many people have encountered them. They're quite real. Now, speaking of ghosts, not all ghosts are evil. All ghosts are ghosts for negative reasons. And all the seemingly stereotypical things that we hear about ghosts and ghost lore, much of it is true. People who commit suicide become ghosts, not because of some retributive sort of morality. That's not why. It's because of why they committed suicide. It was because of that mental state of anguish, such that they felt that they had to kill themselves. It is that mental state of anguish itself that once they are disembodied beings, and in the case of suicide, unnaturally so, because their karma was not played out, now they suddenly find themselves in this realm where, yes, they are in this subtle psychic chitta body, the sushma sharira, but without the ability just yet to go on because the course of karma has been altered, but they don't have a physical body either. Thus, they are stuck there for some time. That's the nature of a ghost. So when we speak about ghosts, again, not all ghosts are evil. They all become ghosts for negative reasons. Again, either suicide or because of just great attachment to a place or to a person, or because throughout their life they engaged in interactions with other ghostly beings while they were alive, etc. But now that they are in that state of being ghosts and not able to move on, the two general categories that you have of ghosts are the sad ghosts or indeed the angry ghosts. So you'll have some ghosts who are just sad. Again, people will report this all the time, that they will encounter ghosts and the ghost is just crying or just in mourning or just seems very sad. But then you will have the angry ghosts. You will have the ghosts who indeed became ghosts because they were not good people in real life. Those are the ghosts, of course, who we especially want to avoid. Those are the ghosts who will come after us because if they could, they would love to harm us. They have that rage within them. They have that anger within them such that they want to harm beings around them. But of course, what do they lack? A physical body. They would love to grab your neck and just strangle you, not even because of you, just because of that rage that's in them. They may not even know who you are, but they have that rage within them. And of course, they can't do anything physically, so they'll try psychically. And in accordance with who they are, how powerful they are as a subtle being, some will be able to affect us more than others. In some cases, we'll be able to detect them, to see them. Even when we're seeing them, of course, those people who have seen them will all almost inevitably report the same thing. Like I was saying with the little shadow beings, you don't see them literally with your eyes. You see them in a much more subtle way. That maybe a little bit later I'll describe. Then there are the pretas. The pretas are a different form of ghost. These are demonic ghosts. These are indeed the ghosts of individuals like psychopaths. Individuals who, even when they were in a body and just living in this world, they were evil. Preta means, you could say, hungry, a hungry ghost. What is meant by that, people often misunderstand what's meant by this. You find this in Buddhism, but it originates in Vedic spirituality. The reason why they're called hungry ghosts is because they crave human contact. They crave many things, actually. But these are the beings who truly want to harm you. When you hear about possessions, for example, of places, and this happens more in the third world than here now, but places where some little child will be possessed and just go through these horrific experiences, that's often a preta. Not always, but often one of these truly raging, angry, demonic, psychopathic ghosts who will take over a person and want to harm that person, and if they could, harm others through that person, if they could. Let's go on a little bit deeper. Now we're leaving the ghost realm behind, and now we're talking about other categories of beings. Nagas. Nagas are very interesting. Sometimes now, due to David Icke, people kind of know what Nagas are. Reptilian beings. Reptilian beings are very interesting. I've talked about these beings very in depth, infinitely more so than David Icke, actually, but it hasn't been published. It's just videotape at this point. Nagas are reptilian beings who people have reported seeing, interacting with. They have entire cultures and civilizations, and this is true across the board, all throughout Europe, all throughout the length and breadth of Asia, all throughout the world. In California, to this day, what was it? I think in the turn of the last century, miners would dig for gold and encounter these beings and run away screaming. These are beings who are reptilian. They look like reptiles, but they are very powerful beings. They're not physical beings. They can become physical. They are shapeshifters. They have the ability to look human if they so desire. They can look like anything. But their actual form is that they're massive beings. They're approximately 12 feet tall. They are cold-blooded, and that means both in their bodily composition, but also they lack empathy. They're very psychopathic. Some of them are fine. Some of them, specifically the ones who live underground, in underground civilizations, are not quite as bad because 2,500 years ago they were converted to Dharma by the Buddha. At least their king was, and then the rest tried to follow Dharma to some degree. The ones who are more advanced and off-world Nagas, off-world reptilians, those are the ones who, when you encounter them, unless they need you for something, they'll kill you and eat you. These are the Nagas. I could say a lot more about the Nagas for hours, but let me just leave it for there. Finally, there are psychopathic humans, but very specific form, very specific class of psychopathic humans. Psychopathic humans who have allowed themselves to be purposefully possessed by demonic beings, any of the above that we mentioned, and other classes of beings. These are people who will go out of their way to try to invoke self-possession, possession of themselves by these demonic beings, thinking mistakenly, oh, how mistakenly, that they are deriving power by doing so. They are deriving power very temporarily. Very temporarily. It is a power that ultimately destroys them in the end, because it's a power that comes from darkness. It's a power that comes from very much the temporal. The more toward the tamasic something is, the more temporal it is, actually. And then, of course, vice versa. All right. Let's go on. Some of the qualities of these dark beings. The first one that I mentioned repeatedly is the most common denominator of such beings: no empathy, lack of empathy. What is meant by empathy? I keep using this term, lack of empathy. Let me explain what I mean by this. Well, what is empathy? Empathy is the ability, very normal ability that most normative human beings psychologically have, such that they can relate to the other. They see themselves in the other. So when you see someone else suffering, when you get that pang of pain in your heart because you see someone else suffering, and you think, oh, that's terrible, oh, I wish I could do something to help that person, that's empathy. That's a very good thing. This ability to relate. The reason why empathy is so important is because this is one of the most important spiritual qualities. This is the basis of compassion. Karuna, this compassion that we hear about so much in so many different traditions. Why do we have compassion for other beings? Because we understand that on one level we are that other being is us, because we are all consciousness, we are all Atman. Thus, when we see another being suffering, it makes us suffer, and thus we want to do something to help them. Well, that instinct of empathy, demonic, dark entities do not have. It's missing. It's just gone. Absolutely gone. Just like with some humans, tonsils are gone. Get your tonsils removed. These people, these beings, they just don't have empathy. They were simply born that way. It's part of their nature. Another important quality or interesting quality that these beings have is control. 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 More so than control over themselves, control over others. If they ever do seek self-control, it's only such that they can control others. But more than anything, they want control over other beings. That's why they're always bothering people. That's why such beings are always bothering people. I want to tell people here a few stories. And these are stories that I, these days, am a lot more comfortable telling. In the past, I didn't. I myself have encountered such beings all of my life. Like with most people in the beginning, they scared me. In the beginning, they were beings who I tried to avoid as much as possible because, indeed, I was scared of them, which is natural. There's a reason why we're scared of them. They have the ability to harm us. But throughout my life, I would quote-unquote see such beings, encounter such beings, either in dream state, in absolute waking state, etc. The last truly negative encounter that I had with such a being, in which that being was in control, was in 1986, and I'll tell you the story of this. Absolutely true story. For those who don't know me, you can feel free to believe I'm making it up. Feel free. I'm not. This is something that happened to me. It's something that happened to me in the same way that I can say, on such and such a date a few months ago, I renewed my driver's license. This happened. In 1986, I was in India. I was staying at one of my guru's ashrams in Kolkata, what sometimes people call Calcutta, Kolkata. And it was a very interesting experience. This was, again, 1986. It may have been around October or so. I was staying in this ashram, which was essentially a house that they had bought not long before, maybe a few months before, maybe even a month before. But they had converted this house into an ashram. I was staying there, and there were a whole bunch of my godbrothers staying there, individuals who, like myself, were initiated by my guru. Well, there were so many people staying there from all over the world, from throughout Europe, Africa. There was one person from Nigeria who I became very close to, very wonderful person, good friends. And there were so many people staying in this house that in the main areas where people were staying, where we had basically just like cots, there was no room. So I ended up having to stay in a different portion of the house. And if you can just kind of envision this, there's this large room, kind of this size, where most of the people are staying. But then there was a doorway leading out into a hallway. There's a bathroom here, hallway going this way. And if you go in this direction, another door, you go through that door, a very small, I guess what was a bedroom. And then past that bedroom, there was a kitchen. Way over here. I slept in that little bedroom on the floor in a sleeping bag because there weren't even cots available. I was alone. and 2 doors away from where the main area was. So as I lied down, I had my feet toward the door leading to the main area, and my head was toward this, what seemed like an ancient kitchen. It was filthy. Pots and everywhere. It looked like no one had used that kitchen in maybe 10 years, who knows how long. There was just dust everywhere, but I was lying on the floor, face up, with my head toward the kitchen. Well, I fell asleep, and then I think it may have been roughly 2 in the morning, something like that. I woke up, and as I woke up, I had this sleep paralysis experience where I woke up and I couldn't move. And now, and this is how I know it was not a dream, because when that happens, you panic. And then I woke up even more, but I still couldn't move. My eyes were closed. And then suddenly I could see with my eyes closed. And I felt myself beginning to rise out of my body. And just without going too deeply, previous to this, I had had many astral travel experiences leaving my body, so I knew the sensation very well. This was not a dream. I was now in energetic form. I was now in psychic form as I floated over my body. And now in this realm, I could quote unquote see everything. I could perceive everything, including my body down there. And I realized this is not good. What's happening? I'm not making myself do this. Something is making me do this. And then I began to detect this being behind me in the kitchen area. And more, I began to go toward that being in astral form. And I could now perceive that being. It was a ghost. It was an Indian man, maybe around 35 or so. He was wearing a white shirt. He was wearing slacks. He was a little bit tubby. And he was pulling me toward him. And he was not saying or doing anything. He was just there and pulling me toward him. And immediately I knew, oh, this is not good. This is an evil person. And what does he want? Why is he pulling me toward him? This is a ghost. Now I've been forced to be in astral form, and now I'm being pulled toward this being, and I can't break it. And I kept trying and trying. And at this point, I had done yoga for years. I had been a monk. This was 1986. I had been a monk, celibate monk for 8 years. I could do nothing. You know, I could kind of slow it down a little bit, but still I was being pulled toward this person who was there in the kitchen. And I didn't know what to do. And then finally I remembered a prayer, Narasingha Stotram, that once in a while we sing here. It's a prayer to Narasingha, who is one of the avatars of God, one of the incarnations of God, who comes very specifically to save his devotees, and he comes in a very ferocious form. And I began to say this prayer to him, and I said it first once, and I could feel his grip loosen. I said it again, and then I snapped back into my body, opened my eyes, and interestingly, slowly but very deliberately, sat up. Now I'm back in my body, and I look behind me, and I look at that empty kitchen, no one there. Of course he was still there. I immediately got up and went into the other room with all the other people who were sleeping. I found a little niche on the floor, and I stayed there. Never went back to that room. But this was the thing that was fascinating, as if that wasn't interesting enough. This was the thing that was especially fascinating. The next night, I told everyone, there's a ghost back there. I'm not sleeping back there. So they made room for me. I got a cot in the main room with everyone else. So I'm sleeping in one cot. My friend from Nigeria is sleeping in another cot, kind of next to me, but a little bit lower. And we're all just sleeping. And after a while, I start to hear my name. And back then, I had a different Sanskrit name. The first name my guru gave me was Prana Krishna. Prana Krishna Das was my first name, before Dharma Pravartaka. And I started to hear my name, Prana Krishna, Prana Krishna. I open my eyes, Prana Krishna. And I look at my friend who's lying there, and his eyes are closed, and he's calling my name. I see his mouth moving. And I can't remember what his name was to this day, unfortunately. But I kind of, what is it? And he just keeps saying, Prana Krishna, with his eyes closed. And I kind of rustle him and I say, what's wrong? What's wrong? Are you okay? And immediately he snaps out of whatever he was in. And he bolts up. And he looked like he had seen a ghost. Because he did. Amazing. He said, oh my God, you're not going to believe it. I couldn't move. I couldn't move. There was some ghost, some being who was here. And I could see him. I could perceive him. And he was trying to pull me out. And I couldn't move. All I could do was call your name because I knew you were right there, very close to me. And thank God you wrestled me the way you did, because I don't know what he wanted from me. But he had complete power over me. There was nothing I could do. Same person, same being, same ghost. But fascinating story. That experience that I had in 1986 with that ghost in India, in Kolkata, who tried to bring me toward it, that was really the last experience that I've had like that of a being, meaning a being who had control over me. I've had bad encounters with them. I've had scary encounters after that. But as far as a being having control over me, the last time it happened was 1986. Now, because of my spiritual practices, on the contrary, they cannot be in my presence. And if they are, they're the ones who are scared. And they flee. They flee, like the cowards that they are. Ultimately, they're cowards. We're going to talk about that in a moment. What feeds them? Because these beings, another reason why they're called preta, another reason why they're called hungry ghosts, they're looking for food. Now, not literal food, they're looking for nourishment, that which gives them their power. Several things give them power, one of which is deliberate worship. There are people who indeed worship ghosts, who worship demonic beings, who worship demonic entities, etc. That's something that draws them to you. That's something that feeds them. Channeling, purposefully channeling such beings. This is one reason why for 30 years now I have told people, be very wary of the channeling process. How did I begin this talk? By explaining, just because you're meeting some being who doesn't have a body does not necessarily guarantee that it is good. Just like any human you meet who you don't know, who's a complete stranger. It might be a good person, or it might be someone who's going to kill you right then. You don't know. The same with disembodied beings. Are some of them good? Of course. Are some of them just kind of neutral and curious about you? Yeah. But then there are the ones who are evil. Do not draw them to you purposefully. Because trust me, in time, and most likely not immediately, but in time, you will regret it. So, losing mental control, losing control of our faculties is another way that we personally can become haunted, possessed by such beings, begin to have such beings influence us. Getting drunk consistently to the point where you just have zero control over your mental faculties and you just do this again and again and again. Such beings are looking for you. Such beings are looking for individuals who, through drugs, through alcohol, for an individual who consistently loses control over their mind and opens that window, such beings can indeed come in. They're looking for you. These are beings who, especially the frustrated ones, who think that they need a physical body to act upon the world, the weaker ones, interestingly. They are looking for people in physical form to inhabit. And usually when they inhabit it, it's not the exorcist. Your head's not going to start spinning. You are still going to be you, but suddenly you're miserable. Suddenly you have dark thoughts in your mind. They are simply there in the background. It's not going to be dramatic at first, but they are there nonetheless. And what feeds them more than anything? What feeds them more than anything? For those who are my somewhat older students and have heard me say this, what does Krishna say in the Bhagavad Gita? Ma shuchaha?
Have no fear.
Fear. Fear. Fear is their food. When you fear them, you give them power. The moment that you realize that there is no reason to fear them, guess what? They fear you. And pretty much automatically. Because they're cowards. They try to make you fear them, and that is based upon an illusion, because truthfully, they do not have power over you. They have what power you give them. But otherwise, they do not have actual power over you, but they'll make you try to think that they do. They work in illusion. Thus, they will try to make you fear them, that fear being based upon illusion. And when you fear them, then they do have power over you. But it's power that you've given them. The moment, and I mean the moment, that they see you do not fear them, the cowards that they are, they run away very, very quickly. They will leave you alone. Now, cut to the chase. How do we defeat them? Let's say we ourselves have been bothered by such beings. What can we do to remove the influence of such beings from our lives? A few things. First of all, leading a sattvic lifestyle. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Remember, I mentioned there are these three modes of material energy. There's sattva, which means goodness, purity, light, etc. There's rajas, and then rajas meaning passion. Then there's tamas, and it's in that tamas that such beings live and grow. Tamas meaning ignorance, darkness, etc. Well, obviously, we ourselves want to live a lifestyle that is absolute opposite of these demonic beings. Thus, we want to live a lifestyle of health. Health on every level, physical, mental, spiritual, on every level. Health, vitality, of purity. Purity, again, not in the Puritan sense. Purity meaning that with everything that we do, we try to live our lives in authenticity. We want to develop goodness within us. Again, goodness also as a positive qualitative attribute. Goodness meaning that we live a life of virtue, of honor, etc., etc. So we want to try to live ourselves a lifestyle and a mental lifestyle as much as possible. That is sattvic, the opposite of the dark in every way. That's number one. Number two, what is the thing that I say all the time that's now become a mantra for many people? We become like that upon which we meditate. In our spiritual practice, let us focus always on that which is the highest, that which is every positive thing that we can think of. Let us not focus our awareness, focus our meditative abilities upon evil and dark beings. Otherwise, we too will become like that. Whatever it is that we have purposeful, willful, conscious awareness upon, our consciousness becomes similarly colored by that. So in every way, focus on things that are wonderful. Let's go on. And again, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, verse 66, Ma Shuchaha. Ma Shuchaha. Do not fear. In every way, cultivate the opposite of fear. Cultivate a healthy self-confidence, a healthy sense that, no, I am in control, not other beings. Lose fear in a positive way, not out of arrogance, but by realizing that there's nothing to fear. There's nothing to fear. If I am a being of good, I have nothing to fear. Nothing can touch me. Nothing can come near me. If I am the sun, let a shadow try to land on me. I am the sun. Let a shadow try to even come near me.